nice areas that are engraved with the negative impression of the barrel. So I'd expect to see, for example, deep lines that define what we call the rifling. And in this case, I don't see that. I just see a series of abrasions on the outside of this bullet. So essentially, whatever this bullet came into contact with, it basically damaged the exterior surface so greatly that the information that was left behind from the barrel is gone.
When you're talking about what the bullet came in contact with, I just want to be clear, are you talking about what the bullet came in contact with after it left the barrel of the gun?
That's correct.
State's Exhibit 99. Explain to us what we're looking at here.
So these are just additional images of the same fired bullet. So I took these using my microscope, so they're a little bit higher magnification. And basically, in both of these photos, the bullet is pointing to the left. So you're looking at the image of the left, you're looking at all of the damage and abrasions that were present on that bullet when I received it. And the image on the right is similar to the one you saw on the previous slide, where it doesn't have the deep gouges in different directions, but the rifling is still virtually gone from this bullet.
Can you tell us what caliber this bullet is?
When we receive fired bullets, the only way we can estimate the caliber is based on the diameter, so I can measure the diameter of the bullet, and also the bullet weight. So for those two items, they were very close between a .44 caliber and a .45 caliber bullet. So I classified it as either a .44 or .45 caliber bullet.
Can you explain to us why a .45 caliber bullet, by the time it gets to you, may have a different diameter and weight?
Sure. So this projectile is lead, which is a relatively soft material. Most modern bullets are going to have a harder jacketing material, so it's going to have a lead core with a harder jacket around it. The most common type is going to be copper, and that harder material is going to protect the lead core. It's going to help it keep its mass as it starts hitting things. But because this is lead, it's relatively soft. It's much more susceptible to damage when it hits things. So it's possible that when I receive a bullet or even a bullet fragment and I go to take a measurement of that bullet, it may be less than the true measurement because it's hit things and I now only have a partial bullet. Or conversely, it could actually be a wider diameter because it hits something and it flattens, so that causes it to expand. So that's why when I'm taking that measurement into consideration, I may not be able to narrow it down to just one specific caliber.
And State's Exhibit 100, what's this?
These are two images of the fired cartridge case that was submitted for the examination. So the left image is from the side, and the right image you're looking at what's called the head stamp of the cartridge. So the head stamp itself is the outer ring where you're going to see information such as the caliber. So .45 Colt is the caliber. You may also see symbols which relate to the manufacturer. And then this silver colored surface in the center here is the primer that I've been talking about. So this is what the firing pin comes into contact with when you pull the trigger. So this crater in the center, that's the firing pin impression. So when the firing pin falls, strikes the primer, it leaves behind an impression of the firing pin. And also during the firing process, the cartridge case rests up against a flat surface called the breech face. And during the firing process, this cartridge case slams into the breech face, and it can pick up an impression of imperfections on that surface. So you may see some parallel lines. Some of these lines are kind of arcing. They almost appear to be crosshatch. Again, there's more parallel lines on the left here. That's an impression that this cartridge case has picked up from the breech face of the firearm.
Did you compare this casing with anything else, any other casings?
This was the only fired cartridge case that was submitted, but I did compare it to those known specimens that I collected from the revolver that was submitted.
And the known specimens, are those the ones that you fired out of the revolver yourself?
That's correct. That's the secondary evidence that I spoke about earlier. So I created that evidence in the lab by physically test firing the gun, and they became my knowns at that point.
Did you form an opinion about whether or not this cartridge casing was fired from the gun that we saw in the earlier exhibits?
Yes, it's my opinion that I identified this cartridge case as having been fired by the revolver.
State's Exhibit 101. What are we looking at here?
So these are representative images of the comparison that I did to get to that conclusion of identification. So if you look at the image on the left, this is two cartridge cases being compared side by side, and this is on my what's called comparison microscope. So at the laboratory I have this microscope. I can mount two specimens. There are two separate microscopes connected by an optical bridge, and there's a binocular eyepiece at the top. So when I look through that binocular eyepiece, I can see images of both specimens side by side. So in the left image, there's this black line running down the center. That's what separates the two cartridge cases. So on the left side, you see my notes at the bottom here, F item 2, that's my annotation for that came from item 2, which is the revolver. So those are my knowns. On the right side is item 3, so that's the cartridge case that was submitted. And in the photo on the left, I'm comparing those breech face marks that I spoke about earlier. So the impression of that flat surface, I'm looking at the parallel lines as well as the crosshatch lines. And the image on the right, I'm looking at the features down within the firing pin impression.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 102. What's this?
These are 4 cartridges that were submitted for examination.
And when they were submitted to you for examination, were you given information about where they came from?
Yes, I do have that information that's been populated into the database.
And if you would tell us, just so that we know what your understanding was, just going to state of mind.
Right. It appears 3 of these were taken from the top of a cart, and the 4th was located in a holster inside of building. Those are the descriptions that I have.
Did you conduct any testing on these cartridges?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
So the process that I spoke about earlier, first I just examined the physical characteristics of these cartridges. I then x-rayed them to see if I could learn anything more about the inside. And then the last step was to actually disassemble these cartridges.
And after going through all of that, did you form an opinion about whether these cartridges were dummies or live?
So these cartridges contained the 4 components that are required to be live functional ammunition. So that being the cartridge case, the bullet. In the bottom here is the primer, which you see in the center of the photograph on the right. And inside the cartridge case is going to be powder, which is the propellant. So these 4 cartridges had all 4 of those main components, which are consistent with being live ammunition.
Is there writing on the head stamp of that bullet? Or the cartridge, rather?
Yes, it's the head stamp of the cartridge. Again, so this is the bottom of the cartridge. It has the caliber, and these kind of flower type logos with a line indicate the manufacturer of the cartridge case.
And did all of these cartridges have that same indication on the head stamp?
Yes.
Did all of the cartridges have the same color primer?
Yes.
Did all of the cartridges have the same shape projectile?
Yes, so you can see in the image on the left the shape of the bullet here, as well as the color, the finish of the bullet. So these are what are called lead flat-nosed bullets.
State's Exhibit 103. What are we looking at here?
This is a photograph of essentially a box of ammunition that was submitted to the lab. So on the right-hand side, you see information that's present on the exterior of the box. And on the left-hand side is the foam tray that's inside that box, as well as the cartridges that were inside it.
When this photo was taken, if you can tell us, had the order of the cartridges in the styrofoam insert been modified?
Yes, so generally a box of ammunition comes in with one item number, and when I opened it up, I saw various things, various calibers, various types of bullets. So I started to form groups based on what was in that box, and then I gave them their own sub-item number. So for instance, I believe this was item 13, and I divided them based on the physical characteristics that I was seeing.
So the cartridges are in different positions in the styrofoam insert in this photo than they may have been at the time they were taken into evidence.
That is possible. I'm not sure what positions they were in at the time it was open.
And did you do any testing on these cartridges that were in this box?
Yes, I did the same series of testing that I've explained before.
And can you summarize for us what was in this box based on your examination and testing?
May I check my notes? Just
Certainly.
double check. So the vast majority of the cartridges that were in this box were dummy cartridges. And some of them had visual indicators. As I mentioned before, they may have a hole drilled in the side, or you could shake them, and again, that's an audible indicator. However, there was one cartridge in this box that, again, it had the 4 components required to be live ammunition.
And when you're looking at this photo, can you identify the cartridge that you believe was determined to be live?
I believe it was this one here with the silver primer.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 104. What's this?
This is actually 2 additional images of that cartridge that I just pointed out on the screen. So this is a side view of the cartridge on the left and an image of the head stamp region on the right.
I want to talk to you about the characteristics of this cartridge compared to the 4 live cartridges that we saw earlier. Does this cartridge have the same shape, projectile, or bullet as the other 4?
Yes, it does.
Does it have the same indication on the head stamp?
Yes,
And does it have the same color primer?
it does.
State's Exhibit 105. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
These are images of additional ammunition that was submitted for examination. And these, some of the ammunition came in being declared as live ammunition. So these are images of some of those cartridges that were submitted.
So these are all live.
They were described as being live, and they had the physical characteristics of being live.
Based on the information that you received that went along with these cartridges, where did these cartridges come from?
May I refer?
Go ahead.
These cartridges are described as having been, or excuse me, as having come from Seth Kenny.
And do these cartridges, are they different than the live rounds the 5 live rounds that we've seen photos of previously?
There are some differences, yes.
What are those?
So I see differences in the morphology of the bullet, so the shape of the bullet. For instance, this first one in the top left, this is actually a nickel-plated hollow point bullet, so it's not the lead flat nose that you previously saw. The images below that, these bullet types are semi-wad cutters. So again, it's just a different design of bullet, so it's different in shape than the ones you previously saw. You also see additional head stamps here, such as Winchester, GFL, which is a trade name called Fiocchi, and as well as CBC, which is made by Magtech. And this, due to the glare, it's a little difficult to see in this photo, but I also believe there's differences in the colors of the primers.
And let me ask you, if you were to go to a gun store and buy a box of ammunition, would the ammunition in that box have different shaped projectiles?
No, if I was buying a brand new box of ammunition, you go to Walmart, it's going to say on the outside what those bullet designs are. For example, it may say jacketed hollow point, it may say round nose, it may say truncated cone. So I would expect if I open that brand new box of ammunition, all of the bullet morphologies would be the same.
Thank you. States Exhibit 106. What's this?
This is another series of photographs of another ammunition box that was scented. So in the top left, you see the exterior of the box. Bottom left, you see that foam insert as well as the cartridges. And then the image of the right, on the right, is just those cartridges being removed from the tray.
Can you tell us where these came from, at least what the description was that was provided to you?
Do you have an item number for this by chance?
I will get you one. $28.
Okay. Item 28 was described as having come from the item 27 tray, which is the tray you see here, which was described as having come from the 26 box. And the 26 box was described as coming from 126 Monroe Street.
In your examination of these cartridges, were you able to make a determination about whether they were live or dummies?
May I refer to this?
Sure.
Okay, so these cartridges were submitted being declared as being live cartridges. So basically they were submitted and it was understood that these were live functioning ammunition. So I did disassemble 2 of these just to essentially verify that, and the 2 that I disassembled, again, it had the 4 main components that are required to be live functioning ammunition. So the ones that I didn't, they were described as being live, but the 2 that I did had all 4 components required.
Are there any differences in the characteristics of these live cartridges compared to the live cartridges that came from the set of the movie Rust?
Yeah, so again, in the bottom left, I see differences in primer color. These are brass as opposed to nickel. I can't read the head stamps in this photograph, but as far as the bullets go, these are also different because we have the ones that have this sort of little lip above the mouth.
Sorry.
Those are called semi-wad cutters, and the other ones, which you see do not have that lip, these are called truncated cone. So the ones that you previously saw, these are different from flat nose because they don't have the rounded sides. It just goes straight. If you were to picture like an orange construction cone, it just goes straight up to the tip.
State's Exhibit 107. What's this? Well, and let's begin with what your understanding was of where they came from.
Again, these were reported as coming from 126 Monroe Street.
Were they provided to you with the understanding that they were presumed live or dummy? What was?
Yes, these were presumed live.
And do you have an opinion about whether or not they are actually live cartridges?
So in this case, I did not disassemble any of these, so I can't speak about what's inside the cartridge. So for instance, does it actually have an active primer? Does it have the propellant? So since I didn't disassemble these, I can't testify that I know what's on the inside. But again, these were described as being live.
And the characteristics of these cartridges, did you find them to be consistent with live ammunition?
Based on my physical observations of the exterior, yes.
And are there differences in the characteristics between these cartridges and the 5 cartridges that were provided to you from the set of the movie Rust?
Yes, it's the same types of differences that we've been discussing. So I see differences in the head stamp, which indicates a different manufacturer, as well as the bullet morphology appears different.
State's Exhibit 108. What's this?
These are additional cartridges submitted, and again, these were submitted being declared as live cartridges.
And did they appear to be consistent with live cartridges?
Two of these I did disassemble, so I could verify that they had the 4 components of live cartridges. The rest I did not. So they were physically consistent with being live, but again, I don't have an understanding of what's occurring inside the cartridge.
And same question. Do these cartridges have different characteristics than the live rounds provided from the set of the movie Rust?
Yes, they do. And it's the same. Various head stamps, various primer colors, various bullet morphologies.
State's Exhibit 109. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
Is State's Exhibit 109 from your notes?
Yes, it is.
Just tell us what we're looking at.
So as part of my examination of the ammunition, I worked with the contributor to figure out which items they wanted disassembled. So I made this chart in my notes. So this shows the images of the cartridges prior to disassembly. The middle column explains the original item number as well as what the item number that I was going to create in order to disassemble a cartridge. And then the last column is just a description of essentially what's left. So for instance, the third row across, item 28 originally was all of those cartridges, but I removed 2, so I sub-itemized 28-1 and 28-2, and then the third column tells you that what's left of 28 is 7 remaining cartridges, and the 2 that I subdivided are eventually what we're going to be disassembled.
And if you already testified to it, I apologize. Did you disassemble all of the live rounds from the set of the movie Rust?
All of the rounds that had the physical characteristics of being live, yes, I disassembled those because I wanted to know if they did or did not have the components on the inside.
Did you take a photograph of the gunpowder that came out of those disassembled rounds from the set of the movie?
Yes, I did.
And did you also take a photograph of the gunpowder that came out of the live cartridges that came from other sources? I think you mentioned Mr. Kenny and also 126 Monroe Street. Did you photograph that powder?
Yes, I did.
And without even using a microscope, did you see differences?
Yes, there were clear differences in both the shapes of the powders as well as the color, which means they may have some different types of coatings on the powder.
Let's move to State's Exhibit 110. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So on the left side, you're looking at a photograph of the powder that was taken from the item 4 cartridge. So this was one that was submitted that was presumed to be live based on its exterior appearance. But once I took it apart, this is the actual powder that I pulled from the inside of that cartridge. And on the right, you're looking at the same thing, but this is from item 24-1, which is one of the cartridges that was submitted as being known to be a live cartridge.
And the powder, I understand on the left we're looking at powder from item 4. Were you able to see the powder from item 5, 6, 7, and 13-1?
Yes, they were all consistent, which is why I only included one photograph, because it would be 5 photographs of the same thing.
Thank you. And I'm going to use briefly a demonstrative aid.
Council, we're going to take our morning bathroom break.
Sure.
Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court.
All rise for the jury.
All right, you may be seated. Council, approach.
Mr. Ziegler, I just have a couple of final questions for you. Can you see these demonstrative aids that I've put side by side on the screen?
Yes.
And can you see the writing at the bottom, the typing?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So the image on the left, is that an exhibit that we've already looked at?
Yes, we've previously seen this photograph.
And same thing with the image on the right. Is that an exhibit we've already looked at?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, there's that writing that was out of the frame. So I'm going to scroll up here. Is this an exhibit that we've already looked at?
Yes.
Item 13-1, did that come from the set of the movie Rust? I'm sorry. 13-1, did that come from the box that was provided to you?
Yes.
The box of ammunition that we saw earlier?
Yes, this was the box where the majority of the cartridges were in fact dummy cartridges, but this was the one that had the characteristics of being live.
And just comparing the ammunition on the left and the ammunition on the right, can you see distinguishing characteristics, understanding that you cannot see the head stamp or the primer?
Yes, so as we've previously discussed, the bullets are a different shape.
And I'm going to show you States Exhibit 102 on the left, and those are items 4 through 7. Where did items 4 through 7 come from in terms of the description you received?
Those were the ones that I previously mentioned were from the top of a cart, and with item 7 being found in a holster inside a building.
Do these cartridges that we're looking at on the left and the right, do they appear to have the same shape projectile?
Yes, they do.
All right, thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Mr. Ziegler, I want to start with your training with the FBI. As part of that training, were you trained in recognizing dummy rounds?
There were many portions of the training manual dedicated to ammunition, ammunition components. I can't recall if there is a specific task related to dummy ammunition.
And by answering that way, it sounds to me like you were not trained on the recognition and characteristics of various types of dummy rounds, correct?
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, do you remember any modules that you were trained on dummy rounds or not?
Not specific, no.
Okay. So you wouldn't know what a Denix round is, would you?
I do not.
Okay. And you wouldn't know a Denix round is from Spain and it doesn't shake and it's a dummy round. You're not aware of that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Now, also with respect to your training, you were trained in gun safety, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as an FBI agent, you're trained in gun safety, including don't point a weapon at anybody?
I'm not an agent, but because I fire as part of my job, I have been trained in safety precautions, yes.
Okay, sir, and as part of your test firing protocols, I'm sure you observe all those safety. Not to point a gun at anybody, treat it as loaded, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. You observe all those.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And sir, you indicated one of your opinions was that your first testing, you determined this gun functioned normally.
That's correct.
Okay. When you were doing that functionality test on the revolver you received, what types of things did you look at on the firearm?
So first I would inspect things like, are there bulges in the barrel, cracks in the frame, things that I may think may lead to a catastrophic failure during the testing.
Okay, sir, do you take that revolver apart in the initial stage?
I do not.
So later on, and I'll come back to this, but you indicated when you hit that hammer with your mallet that it fractured some internal components, correct?
Correct.
And there was the sear. We saw a little piece of the trigger. You remember, sir?
Yes.
Now, because you did not open the revolver prior to doing that hammer test, can you be certain any of those pieces weren't broken before?
I would say I can't be 100% certain. However, because it did function normally, I would expect those pieces were intact at the time I received it and did that initial examination.
Okay, and when you visually examined it from the outside, you then test fired that weapon 12 times, is that right?
As it was 12 times throughout the process, but yes.
And you observed when you did that it had to be fully cocked and that trigger had to be depressed to fire it, correct?
Aside from the hammer being at rest and being struck on a loaded chamber.
Correct. And other than those tests you did, I'm talking about the first part, it fired normally.
Correct.
Okay. Now, after you did that normal gun functionality testing, you determine its functioning, you then do what's called accidental discharge testing. Is that right?
That was after the microscopic comparisons were done, so that was the last test that I did.
Okay, so you do the functionality, then you do the microscopic examination we saw, and then you do the accidental discharge.
Correct.
Okay. Now, the accidental discharge, you mentioned that you consulted the FBI SOP.
That's correct.
Now, an SOP is a standard operating procedure.
Yes, sir.
Now, under that standard operating procedure, were you to do a type of test called a drop test?
So the drop test is, I would say that's a subcategory of accidental discharge where I physically drop the firearm to see if it will fire. And that is typically only done if that is as the situation has been reported by the contributor. So that was not relevant in this case.
Okay, when you say, and a drop test, you can tell the jury more, that's when you, from a distance of about 4 feet, drop the weapon, and if it lands and it fires, that's what you're trying to determine, correct?
It depends on how the situation is being reported. So within that same SOP, it provides the examiner some discretion as in regards to how that is believed to occur. So for instance, say I'm cleaning my gun and I accidentally knock it off the table and I'm saying that caused it to fire. I would try to replicate that situation. If I had a gun leaning against a door and I'm saying that the door opened and the firearm fell, I would try to replicate that situation. So yes, the traditional drop test is just it being held as you would to shoot it and dropping it, but there is some discretion that's allowed if it is being reported in a certain way.
Okay, and you're familiar with SAMI standards, are you not?
Yes.
And SAMI is the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturing Institute, is that correct?
That is correct.
They were commissioned by the federal government about 100 years ago to come up with industry-type standards?
I don't know when they were instituted, but yes, they come up with standards for ammunition as far as dimensions and things like that.
1926. Were you aware of that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So in their SAMI standards, there is a standardized drop test. You're aware of that?
I'm not.
Okay, but that's the industry standard for firearms across the country. This type of testing, right? Multiple states use this?
I wouldn't say that's the industry standard, and also their industry is different from the forensic industry.
Okay, and you also know there's no type of shock test. Do you know what a shock test is?
In regards to what?
Well, it's kind of what you did with the mallet. are you familiar with the National Institute of Justice? They call it a shock test.
I'm not familiar with that test.
Okay. So when you made your determination to hit that revolver with a mallet, is that part of the SOP that you hit it with a mallet?
That is written in the SOP, yes.
How many times have you done that as a forensic examiner? How many weapons you've done that on?
I would say probably less than 10, and this is the first one that I've had in actual casework.
Okay, so in actual casework, what do you mean by that?
As opposed to training.
Oh, in training. So the other 9 were done in training when you hit it with the mallet.
I don't know the exact number, but yes.
So this is literally the first time in your career as a forensic examiner that you've ever, in cases, hit a revolver with a hammer.
That is correct.
So is it fair to say you've never had this situation where you've hit a revolver and it's broken before?
Not in a case.
Okay. Did that happen in training?
I don't know about it specifically being a revolver, but yes, I have done it in training where the firearms do break.
And you earlier told us that you base your discretion on that accidental discharge test on input given to you about what might have happened.
Not the accidental discharge test. That would be the drop test.
Drop test. So you didn't have any information this was hit with some kind of hammer on the rest set, correct?
That's correct. I did not.
Okay, but you chose to do this, and then you hit the weapon with the hammer resting in the resting position, right?
Yes.
And then you did in the full cock position, correct?
It was not in that order, but you are correct.
Okay, and I'm not trying to mix it up, but when you hit it with the full cock position, that's when you broke the internal components.
Yes.
Now, do you know how hard you hit that?
I do not.
So on a drop test, would you agree with me? You're trying to eliminate variables. So in other words, gravity is the same, right?
Sure.
Gravity's not going to change. So if you drop that gun from 4 feet every time, and you know the weight of that gun, you're eliminating variables, correct?
I suppose so.
Okay. Well, have you been taught that at all in the FBI?
No. The purpose of these tests is not to figure out exactly what height or exactly what amount of force or exactly how many numbers of times you have to strike this firearm to get it to fire. It's just to try to generally replicate the situations and see if the firearm will fire without pulling the trigger.
Well, sir, so did you ever measure the trigger pull force on that revolver?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
What was the trigger pull force?
May I refer to my notes?
Yes, sir.
Between 2 and 2.5 pounds.
2.5 pounds, okay. Did you measure the weight of that firearm?
The weight of the...
Of the revolver?
No.
Okay. So, and you have no idea the foot-pounds of pressure that you were applying to that hammer when you hit it with the mallet, correct?
Right. There's no way to quantify that.
And there's no way to quantify when you do that 6 times if you're hitting it the same amount every time, right?
That's correct.
As a human being, I mean, you're not going to hit it the exact same every time.
I believe that's true, yes.
Okay. So, as we sit here, we don't know what amount of force was required to break that hammer and the internal parts, correct?
That's correct. We do not.
Okay. So if there was a question whether or not an external force of some type hit that hammer, we don't know from your testing what amount of force that was that would cause that.
You are correct.
Okay. If you were you given any other information regarding the accidental discharge testing that you can recall?
Initially that test was not requested. It was not part of the initial exam. That the decision to do that test came in later conversations with the case agent.
Okay. So initially they did not even ask you to do that, but it was sometime later they did.
Correct.
And did you have any understanding as to why you were going to do that?
I believe it had something to do with one of the individuals involved stating that the trigger was not pulled.
Was that Alec Baldwin?
I believe so.
And based on your testing on the functionality, that comment about the trigger not being pulled could not have happened.
I wouldn't say, I can't say it's impossible because I can't account for every single variable. All I can testify to is the results of my testing. Okay, so when I received the firearm and I did that initial function examination, it did not appear that any of the safeties were malfunctioning or anything like that. So it was functioning normally when I received it.
And to be fair, sir, you did indicate earlier you do this in a lab. So you can't account for all the variables that might occur on a movie set, for example.
Sure.
Okay. So your testimony, and you're telling the jury that you can account for the variables you're aware of, but you cannot account for variables you might not be aware of.
Sure.
Okay. And some of those variables, and we'll come to the rounds in a little bit, but some of those variables include if you do not receive evidence or a request to test it, you're not going to test that, obviously.
That's true.
Okay. With regard to the hammer testing, you mentioned earlier that this could be destroyed permanently as part of your testing. So you got permission to do this test, correct?
Yes.
And that would have been for the sheriffs?
Well, my point of contact was a special agent out of Albuquerque. So I would funnel information to him. He would discuss that with the detectives, and then they would distribute the answer back to me.
And that was Jose Cortez?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Cortez is the one that sent you the request by submission, written submission for what he wanted you to do, correct?
As far as the communication, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. I'm referring to your report. There is a submission October 28, 2021 from Jose Cortez requesting various tasks to be done.
Yes.
Okay, and then there's another one, 12/14/2021. Same thing. So he's your liaison that goes back and forth between the sheriffs and yourself, and he makes those requests.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, so you got permission to possibly destroy this revolver permanently. They gave that to you.
I received permission to conduct the test.
And you made it aware to them that this could destroy the weapon.
Yes.
Okay. When you did destroy that, you broke several internal parts.
Yes.
Okay. And then we saw that on the exhibit. You took those apart to show what had happened. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also said that you did not see any modifications as to that firearm, correct?
At what point?
You testified that in your functionality examination, you also determined whether it had been modified or not.
Right. So that's generally in regards to things like, has the barrel been cut? Has the stock been cut? Has this been modified to fire fully automatic? So when I talk about modifications, that's what I'm referring to, and I did not see any of those things.
Okay. And as far as internal modifications, did you look at that?
No, because I can't disassemble the firearm because I have to test it in the condition it's received.
Okay, but from your viewing it and your observation, you didn't notice anything that would tell you it was modified.
Right, nothing jumped out immediately.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned that the full cock notch, which was the one we saw in that picture, kind of a little circle. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay, sir, you said that it looked a little flatter potentially?
Compared to the quarter and half cock, yes, it didn't have as much of a claw shape to it.
But you could not, you did not conclude that had been modified. You're not certain it had been modified.
Right, I'm not certain. It's a very small surface that we're talking about, so it's possible, it may have been modified, it may have been damaged during the exam, or it could also be one of the firearms that just doesn't have a very pronounced sear notch there.
Okay. So you just don't know for sure.
Correct, I don't.
Okay. Now, I want to turn to the rounds. One of the things I heard you say several times is there's 4 components to determine a live round. Is that right, sir?
Yes, a live cartridge has 4 main components.
And you said the case, the projectile or bullet, the primer, and then the powder.
Correct.
So you also testified earlier that when you were given presumed live rounds, but you did not disassemble them, you could not confirm they were live because you didn't get inside to see the powder.
Right, so there were certain cartridges that, again, I discussed this plan with the case agent, the contributor, to try to figure out which ones we needed to take apart. So there was a subset that we concluded needed to be disassembled. So, for example, the ones that were presumed to be live, we needed to see what was on the inside of those cartridges. However, they sent quite a few live, presumed live cartridges. So it didn't make sense to take apart every single piece of ammunition that they sent in. So we came up with a sampling plan to where we just determined we were going to take apart some of them as a representative sample.
Sure, and I guess my question too was, you can't tell something is a live round until you make that final step to determine if there's powder inside.
Yes, that is true.
Okay, so you could not, for example, in your FBI training, you could not look at a picture and determine that's definitively a live round.
I wouldn't do that based on a photograph, no.
Okay, and that's part of your FBI training, that you would have to go through the 4 components, take it apart, make sure there's powder, and that's what gives you the confirmation, correct?
I would say yes. In order to know for sure, you would have to be able to see the powder, yeah.
Okay. That's how you've been trained.
I would say it's training related to ammunition and just understanding the components of the ammunition.
Okay. Now, as part of this also, you identified rounds that were live, and those were items, and we saw it on the last slide, items 1B 4 through 7. Is that correct?
Those aren't the 1B numbers, I don't believe. It's the lab numbers, and it was items 4 through 7 and 13-1.
You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was 4 through 7 and 13-1.
Correct.
Were the lives. Okay. Now, you later in December received a request from Mr. Cortez, Agent Cortez, to conduct DNA testing. Is that right? Your lab did?
I'm not completely certain of that.
Objection Foundation.
And I can ask a question on that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Does that request for DNA testing go to you, or does it go to another person in your lab?
I'm going to object to Foundation again. If he doesn't know what request he's talking about, he can't answer.
Can you be more specific?
Yes. And I can show you, sir, the report.
I'm objecting to Foundation. Why are we showing him a report that he hasn't seen?
You haven't seen your own report? Have you seen your own report?
My report would not include anything related to DNA, so I'm not sure which report you're referring to.
Okay, I'm just referring to the submission to the FBI lab by Jose A. Cortez, dated 12/14/2021. And did you see that?
I'd have to look at it.
Okay. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Hold on for a second. Are you having a problem with it?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, sir, I'm going to show you this request from 12/14/2021. If you could just look at it, don't tell us what it is, but just read it to yourself. And you don't have to read the whole thing.
Okay.
Okay, is your memory now refreshed on that?
So that is not my report. That is an electronic communication from the field office, the case agent being Jose Cortez.
Okay, and you did not receive that personally?
Eventually I received that.
Okay, so you have seen it.
Yes.
Okay, so you know that certain standards were submitted in this case. Are you aware of that regarding fingerprints and DNA?
I'm sure I've seen that, but that's not related to my discipline, so that doesn't affect my examination. So I don't know that that's not noteworthy to me.
Okay, so you reviewed it, but you did not participate in that.
Correct.
And right as we're sitting right now, you don't know what was submitted in terms of the people and their standards. Is that right?
I do not.
Okay. With regard to the live rounds we were seeing on those exhibits earlier, did you measure the projectile tops on each of those rounds?
No, I did not.
And so you're not able to tell us whether there are differences at all or not in the size of those projectile tops?
When you say the top, you're talking about the flat portion?
The flat portion.
And you're referencing the diameter of that flat portion?
Correct.
No, I can't tell you if those are consistent. Just the shape is consistent.
Okay. When you took the powder out of the rounds, did you weigh that powder?
I don't believe I did.
Okay, so you're not certain whether the rounds were full of powder or partially full of powder or not?
I'm not.
Okay. Let me ask you, going back to the gun, I missed one question. Before you conducted that test fire, did you look in the barrel with a bore scope?
No.
With regard to the rounds that came from Seth Kinney, you were told you have them in your report, and the Monroe Street address, you have no idea what time those were seized or what date those were seized?
I don't off the top of my head. That may be in the paperwork that was submitted, but I don't know that.
Okay. And you have no idea where Seth Kinney brought the rounds that he submitted?
I do not.
And he didn't submit them to you, correct?
No, we received evidence from the case agents.
Okay. And you didn't personally conduct any fingerprint or DNA testing because that's out of your specialty?
That's correct. I did not.
Earlier you were talking about the different types of ammo from 126 Monroe Street. Do you recall that you were showing live, dummy, and blank, all three types?
Can you ask that question again?
Sure. As part of your examination of the rounds from 126 Monroe Street, you're aware that there were live rounds, blank rounds, and dummy rounds.
Objection. That misstates the facts that are already in evidence.
Let him answer the question.
Do you have specific item numbers that I can reference?
Well,
I can ask for clarification if that's helpful.
Sure, absolutely. We saw some exhibits from 126 Monroe Street, and if you want to look at your report to check out those items and determine if there were both live rounds, dummy rounds, and then if there were blanks.
Okay, may I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
So the ammunition that I have as being reported from that address includes items 28, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37. And these were the cartridges that were submitted as being known live ammunition. Some of them I disassembled, but not all of them because there were too many. So all of these were either physically consistent with live ammunition based on their exterior appearance, or the ones that I actually did disassemble, I could determine it had the four main components.
Okay. All right, and thank you for looking for that. Now, with regard to the set, the live rounds you found on set, did you do any further testing on those with regard to the powder or anything like that, or is that out of your discipline?
That goes beyond my discipline. There was another unit that did some testing on the powder, but I can't testify to that.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have just a moment?
Yeah.
Your Honor, thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Redirect.
Briefly, thank you. Mr. Ziegler, why not disassemble every round that was provided to you that was what I'm going to call presumed live?
All right, there were hundreds of rounds submitted in total. So, for instance, you may have one item number, but that was an entire box of 50 cartridges. So, in totality, just from practical purposes as well as, what is the result, what impact will this have on the result, it didn't make sense to disassemble every single cartridge that was submitted.
Did you x-ray any of the ammunition that was provided to you that was presumed live?
Yes, I x-rayed every cartridge that was submitted.
You x-rayed every single cartridge.
I did.
So you didn't disassemble every single cartridge, but you x-rayed every single cartridge.
That's true.
What did the x-ray images tell you about those presumed live cartridges?
May I refer to...
Certainly.
I just wanted to verify, I did x-ray every cartridge. And what that told me is there were indicators in the dummy cartridges that I could see in the x-ray. So whether they would be the holes in the size of the cartridge case, I could see that on an x-ray, as well as some of them had metal BBs, so the metal BBs showed up in the x-ray. So the live cartridges, the gunpowder does not show up, that's not visible. But I didn't see any of those other indicators to suggest that they may be something else that, other than what they were reported as being.
And just to be clear, the dummy cartridges that you examined and disassembled, there were no dummy cartridges that came from 126 Monroe Street.
That's correct. Every cartridge that I have as being listed from that address was either consistent with being live or I actually disassembled it and it had the components of being live.
And when you say consistent with being live, not only are you talking about the physical characteristics, but also the x-rays.
That's true. There was no indication from the x-ray that they were anything else.
You testified on cross-examination that of those live rounds that were provided to you, you took a representative sample, and those were the ones that you disassembled.
Correct.
Can you tell us how you decided which rounds to include in your representative sample for disassembly?
Right. So as I mentioned before, working with the contributor, there were certain ones that they needed to have disassembled, but then when it came to these exemplars, we agreed to do a random sampling. And the way that I chose that, it was random as far as the item numbers go, but I also looked for cartridges that had similar head stamps. So I was trying to see if similar exemplars might have similar features on the inside.
in any of the presumed live rounds that you disassembled after putting them into your representative sample, did any of them turn out to be dummies?
Yes, there was actually one that from the exterior appearance and the x-ray, I didn't see any indication that it was a dummy round. And then after disassembling that, I found there was no powder, and you can see down into the primer pocket it was hollow, so it was an inactive primer. So there was one cartridge that was submitted that on the outside appeared live, but upon further inspection did not have the 4 components required to fire a cartridge.
Can you tell us what item number that was?
It was item 22.
And can you tell us what your understanding was in terms of the description, where item 22 came from? And specifically, I'd like to know, did it come from 126 Monroe or Mr. Kenny?
Item 22 is a cartridge from the item 20 box, which is a box with tape from the prop truck.
Thank you, sir. Do you have to measure those projectiles or bullets to be able to see that they are different than the projectiles in the live rounds from the movie set?
No, they have distinct shapes in morphology, and some of them have distinct coatings, such as one of the projectile was a nickel-coated hollow point bullet.
You can just see that with your naked eye.
You can, and the photographs with glare and the print quality may not show it as well, but if you had the bullets, the cartridge in your hand, you would be able to see distinct shapes.
All of the items that you had, that you tested, that you examined, when your testing is complete, what do you do with them?
They get packaged in their appropriate outer packaging, and then they get returned to the field through, we have a unit at the laboratory that helps us out with this called the Evidence Management Unit. So they basically inventory everything, make sure everything that's supposed to be there is still there, and they're the ones that ultimately return it to the field.
And when you say they return it to the field, does it go right back to the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office?
Typically, if it's associated with an FBI case, it's going to go to the FBI field office.
Do you know what happened in this case?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
All right, you're excused. Thank you.
The state calls Shannon Prince.
I'm to remind any witnesses in this case that haven't been called, except expert witnesses, to stay off the live stream.
Face the judge and raise your right hand.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, have a seat talking to the microphone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Shannon Prince. My last name is spelled Prince.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
And what's your title at the FBI?
I am a physical scientist, forensic examiner.
How long have you been employed in the latent print discipline?
Over 19 years.
And are you a member of any professional organizations related to your employment?
Yes, I am. I'm a member of the International Association for Identification.
And do you instruct any courses in the latent print discipline?
Yes, I do. I instruct courses on latent print processing, which is using chemicals to develop latent prints, as well as post-mortem processing, which is using fingerprints to identify the unknown deceased.
And do you take proficiency tests as part of your ongoing work at the FBI?
Yes.
How often and how many?
I take one proficiency test each year in comparing prints, and I've taken one test every 5 years in processing latent prints.
Have you ever failed a proficiency test?
No, I have not.
All right. And are you a certified latent print examiner?
Yes, I am. I am a board-certified latent print examiner with the International Association for Identification.
Great. Your Honor, at this time, I move the court to recognize Ms. Prince as an expert witness in the area of latent fingerprint examination.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, you're recognized as an expert in latent print fingerprint examination.
Thank you. All right, why don't you give us an idea about what your duties are as a latent print examiner?
I receive a variety of evidence from either FBI field offices or state, local, and tribal officers. I receive this evidence in the laboratory, and then I examine that evidence with a variety of chemicals, powders, or light sources. When I develop latent prints, I then compare those latent prints to known prints of individuals and come to conclusions. I may search those latent prints in a fingerprint database, such as a computer, to make identifications. And then I provide a report based on my results. I can also testify in the court of law on those results.
You mentioned you work with a known fingerprint. Can you explain to us what a known fingerprint is?
On the palm side of your hand, you have these raised portions of skin called friction ridges. They form patterns on your hand. You also have them on the soles of your feet. In order to record a known print, the finger is usually rolled in black printer's ink and then rolled on a contrasting white background, such as a fingerprint card. And that creates a known print. These days, it's often recorded by placing your finger on a flatbed scanner, and it creates a digital copy of your fingerprint.
And you also mentioned latent fingerprints. What is a latent fingerprint?
A latent print is the unintentional or chance reproduction of your friction-ridged skin when you touch an object. When you touch an object, you may leave a latent print. It's often left in the oils and sweat on your hand, but it can be left in other substances, such as blood, dirt, grease, ketchup. It's often not readily visible and requires a forensic light source, such as a laser, a chemical, or a powder to be made visible.
And how are fingerprints compared and identifications affected?
It's a 3-step process, which is called analysis, comparison, evaluation, or ACE, ACE, where I analyze latent prints, looking if they're suitable. Then I can compare those latent prints and known prints side by side, and then making an evaluation decision, where I can make one of 3 decisions. An identification decision, the latent print and known print were made by the same person. An exclusion decision, where the latent print and known print were not made by the same person. Or an inconclusive decision, where I don't have enough information to make a conclusive decision. Often this is times when a fingerprint card, like a known card, is smeared or smudged, or it has too much ink. I can't make a conclusive comparison because that print is too poor to make a conclusive decision.
Great. And when you receive evidence for latent print exams, what factors do you consider prior to starting your examination?
I look at what type of evidence it is. It could be a porous item, which means it's like paper or money or cardboard. I also look if it's semi-porous, which is kind of a shiny cardboard, or if it's non-porous, which is smooth or shiny, like aluminum, plastic, glass. So I look at what type of evidence it is to determine what chemicals or light sources I'm going to need. And then I look at the condition of the evidence. Is the evidence broken? Is it shattered? Is it dirty? Is it covered with something? Or was it previously processed in the field by a crime scene investigator? I look at all that in order to determine what exams I will do and how I will proceed with those exams.
Great. I'm going to show you what was previously marked as State's Exhibit 63. And let's see. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Have you actually seen the original version of what that photograph demonstrates before?
Yes, I have.
All right. And where did you see that?
I saw that back at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
All right. And did you examine Exhibit 63 for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
All right, what specific examinations did you conduct on this item?
So this item of evidence is an ammunition box, and it's semi-porous, meaning it's shiny paper, but it also has non-porous qualities. So the first examination I do is simple visual examination, looking to see if there's any visible prints. You do this every day when you see fingerprints on your cell phone or on a garage door or a mirror. That's a visual examination. So I first do that exam. And then I take this box into a dark room where I have a green light or a laser, a blue light or an ultraviolet light, and I shine that light on the object while I'm wearing orange or yellow goggles to see if any prints may fluoresce. At this point, I've used no chemicals on this item. The next process I use is called superglue fuming, where I place this item in a chamber, I hang it in a chamber, and then in the chamber I heat superglue at a high temperature. The superglue starts to fume. It starts to appear like white fumes. Those fumes adhere to any kind of moisture that might be on that object, and it creates a white print. And I can either see that print visually, or I need a reflective ultraviolet light to be able to see those prints. Then I also do a magnetic powder right after that process. The magnetic powder is black, since it's the white box, so it's contrasting, and I can see if there's any visible prints that way. The black powder, black magnetic powder, adheres to the white superglue prints. And then I take this box and use a chemical called indanedione, I-N-D-A-N-E-D-I-O-N-E. This is a chemical that is sprayed on the item, and then it is placed in a humidity chamber where a chemical reaction is sped up. This chemical develops any kind of amino acid that may be in your sweat, and it creates a pink or orange print. And I can see that print either visually or in a dark room with a light source. And finally, I take a fluorescent dye stain and I spray this orange chemical on this box, and it adheres to those superglue prints as well, and I can see those prints in a dark room with an ultraviolet light or a laser.
And just to be clear, you did all of that, you did all of those tests with regard to the box that's in this photograph, correct?
Yes.
All right, and what was the result of your testing?
On this box, I developed 10 latent fingerprints.
All right. Did you compare the latent prints that you detected on Exhibit 63 to the known prints of any individuals?
Yes, I did.
Which individuals did you compare those known prints to?
I compared these prints to Hannah Gutierrez, Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
And did you find a match?
Yes.
Who did you find a match for?
2 of these latent prints were identified to Hannah Gutierrez.
All right. And were you able to find matches to any of the other known samples?
No.
All right. And were you able to exclude any of the other individuals based on your test?
The remaining prints were excluded as being prints from Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
Thank you. Did you also examine a second ammunition box as part of this case?
Yes.
Does this appear to be a photograph of that box?
It is.
All right.
Can you give us the exhibit number?
Oh, I apologize. This is State's Exhibit 48. Where did you see this box prior to today?
At the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
All right. And did you examine this box for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
And did you conduct the same type of analysis that you did on the previous box?
Yes. The examinations I conducted on this box were the exact chemicals, light sources, and powders that I used on the previous box.
Great. And what was the result of your examination of this box?
There were 3 latent fingerprints detected on this box.
All right. And were you able to compare those latent prints to the known samples of any individuals?
Yes.
And who were those folks?
I compared the 3 latent fingerprints to Hannah Gutierrez, Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
And did you find any positive matches for any of those individuals?
There were no identifications.
Were you able to find any exclusions?
Yes. Sarah Zachary and Alec Baldwin were excluded from the 3 latent prints detected on this item, and Hannah Gutierrez and David Hall were inconclusively compared to these prints.
All right. So just to be clear, Sarah Zachary, you didn't find her fingerprints on this box whatsoever?
The 3 latent prints were excluded from being Sarah Zachary.
Great. Is it possible to touch an item and not leave a latent print?
Yes.
And what kind of circumstances might that occur?
There are several circumstances where you can touch an item and not leave a latent print. First of all, you could be wearing gloves or a mitten, and when you touch an object, you may not leave a latent print because your skin is not having contact with that object. You may have too much sweat or too little sweat on your hand, and that may not leave a latent print. The surface itself may be dirty or textured, and it's difficult to leave a latent print on a dirty or textured surface. The print may be on a surface where if it's overhandled, such as if I put my hand here, and the next person comes and put their hand here, someone at the end of the day puts another hand here, it's overhandled, and that could wipe away any prints that may be on an item. There's also environmental conditions, wind, rain, snow, heat and humidity. Those can all play a factor of whether a latent print is detected on an item.
And did you attempt to do any examination of cartridge casings in this case?
Yes.
And what was the result of that examination?
I examined 4 cartridge cases, and there were no suitable latent prints detected on those cartridge cases.
And is it unusual for you to be unable to identify a latent print on a cartridge casing?
It is not unusual.
And why not?
Cartridge cases, when they go through a firearm, there's a lot of heat and friction, and that can destroy a latent print. Also, it's a very small surface that's on a cartridge case, so leaving a suitable print can be difficult. And it's also a smooth surface, so any kind of movement that comes into contact with a cartridge case may destroy a print on a cartridge case.
Great. Have you worked on any other cases where there were a large number of cartridge casing rounds that you attempted to examine for latent prints?
Yes, I have.
Can you give us an example of a case where you worked and explain to us, based on the number of casings that you found, how many actually were found to contain latent prints?
A case that I have been a part of was the Las Vegas shooting several years ago, where there was a significant amount of firearms, ammunition, and magazines in that case. Specifically to the ammunition, which consisted of shot shells as well as cartridges, we processed and examined over 6,900 pieces of ammunition, where we only detected 26 prints on those 6,909 ammunition. That's 0.38%, so it's a very low chance of developing prints on ammunition. We also processed firearms in that case. We processed about 40 firearms in that case, and we detected prints on 12% of those firearms. And then we processed over 180 magazines in that case, and we only detected prints on 9.7% of firearms. So it's a very low chance of getting prints on firearms or ammunition based on the size of the item, the texture of the item, as well as overhandling of those items. Those are all reasons why there's a low recovery rate on firearms and ammunition.
Thank you. And the 4 cartridge casings that you attempted to do fingerprint examination in this case, on your notes, does it indicate what the source of those cartridge casings was?
I'd have to refer to my notes for the specific source of those cartridge cases.
Do you mind?
May I?
Yes.
I don't have a specific source. I just have the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office item number.
Do you mind providing that?
It's item 144.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-exam?
Ma'am, good morning.
Good morning.
With regard to your work, when you compare a Latin print against a standard, you were given those standards from the agency. For example, here the sheriffs, correct?
Yes.
So here you had 4 people as standards. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was Mr. Halls, Sarah Zachary, Alec Baldwin, and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so one of those people you did not receive standards from is a guy named Seth Kenny, correct?
Correct.
And so of all the other people on the set, the only 4 you received standards from were those 4.
That is correct.
Okay. And those standards included Latent prints, fingerprint cards, and DNA.
The standards I received were fingerprints and palm prints from Gutierrez, Zachary, and Halls, and I only had a fingerprint card for Alec Baldwin.
Okay, you didn't have a palm print for him?
I did not.
Now, I know that you had stated that Halls and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, Mr. Halls and her prints were not completely rolled, or they were over-rolled?
Correct. Their known standards were not complete. There was some over-inking in one area, and when a fingerprint card is fully rolled, it's usually from nail to nail, where you can get the whole finger. This case, on some of these standards, the finger wasn't fully rolled completely. Therefore, I did not have enough information to do a conclusive comparison.
So when you don't have that completely rolled from the agency submitting to you, it's difficult for you to do a conclusive comparison.
It does make it difficult.
Okay. And that was the case here with Ms. Gutierrez-Reed and with Mr. Halls.
Yes, it was.
With regard to the prints that you were able to conclude, and you indicated Ms. Gutierrez-Reed's prints were found on one of the boxes.
That is correct.
Now, you were able to conclusively do that because?
I was able to conclusively do that because some fingers had that comparable area. So if there was an area that I can compare completely, I can make that conclusive decision. And in those two identifications, I was able to conclusively compare and make an identification.
And with regard to the other box that we saw, you found 3 latent prints.
That's correct.
And you indicated that Ms. Zachary and Mr. Baldwin were excluded, correct?
Correct.
And that Mr. Halls and Ms. Gutierrez-Reed were inconclusively compared, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that was because, again, you told the jury that you didn't have a complete, well-rolled set of fingerprints.
That is correct.
All right. And that would have been something the agency, the sheriffs would have provided?
Those standards came directly from the sheriff's office.
Did anybody ever communicate with you, and was there communication regarding we need new fingerprint standards?
There was no communication. In my report, I indicated that if further comparisons needed to be conducted, that standards would have to be submitted.
In your report, and if you need to refer to it to refresh your memory, you did not conduct fingerprint analysis on items 4 through 7 and item 13.1, correct?
I'd have to refer to those specific numbers.
Absolutely.
You said 4 through 7?
4 through 7 and 13.1. 13-1.
I did not conduct examinations on those items.
Okay. So the ones that you conducted it on we've seen today.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to the case you worked on, the Las Vegas shooting, you talked about the low percentage and the ability to recover prints from fired cartridges, correct?
From all types of ammunition.
Okay. Now, with regard to unfired ammunition, they don't go through that heat of the barrel, correct?
That is correct.
And so does that make it more likely prints can be found on those cartridges?
The same percentage refers to that as well, less than 1%. It's due to overhandling of cartridges or shot shells, the surface, the smooth surface, and a variety of other reasons that it could be a low chance of recovering prints on unspent cartridges.
On unspent cartridge, okay, but it is possible, even very low possibility, it is possible to recover them.
It is.
Okay. And you have listed, there's certain elements that might come into that, like overhandling, that kind of thing. For example, the box you said earlier, that was handled by another unit?
The box, what specific box are you talking about?
Oh, I'm sorry, not the box. I was talking about, you mentioned in your report that there was some overhandling, and one of your employees came up as contributing 8 fingerprints to one of the items.
Correct. One of the boxes was sent to the firearms unit first, which is usually on the latter end of examinations when it flows to the laboratory. But this box came in, it was specifically for that unit. And then after the firearms examinations were conducted, the request was to do latent prints. So it was kind of backwards in order. Therefore, this item of evidence was handled by the firearms unit, and a firearms employee was identified on that box.
And that was 8 of the prints out of a total of 10 or 11 were the employee, right?
8 out of 10 were identified to an FBI laboratory employee.
And ideally, that should have gone to you first.
In a regular case, the evidence is usually where it goes to a unit that can have less destructive examinations on it to more destructive. That's how it kind of moves the laboratory. And this box initially went to the firearms unit first.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
I just have one quick question for you. Mr. Bowles mentioned items 4 through 7 and 13-1. Can you tell the jury why you weren't able to perform a print comparison on those cartridges?
I do not. Are they cartridge cases? I don't have them in my report, so I never received those items.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
All right, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're going to take our lunch break now. All right, so be back downstairs at 12:30. Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court. Thank you. Take your tablets with you.
All rise for the jury.
We're in recess.